All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our topic today for our Invasive Species Awareness Week webinar is the European green crab. And before we get started with the presentation, I wanted to just quickly go over a few housekeeping tips. The first one is to please put all speaker questions into the Q&A box. At the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, you are going to see a Q&A option, and that is where you're going to put any questions for the speakers. We really ask that you just reserve the chat for technical difficulties. We also are going to be presenting a code word at some point throughout the webinar, and that is for anyone who is seeking a pesticide recertification credit from the Washington State Department of Agriculture. So you're going to want to be listening to that. If you lose connection to the webinar, we just ask that you use the same link to rejoin. And you can do that by following the link in your confirmation email that you received. And there's also a phone number that you can use to call in and at least get the audio. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to the Executive Coordinator of the Washington Invasive Species Council, Stephanie Helms, to provide a little introduction.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maria, and welcome everybody. My name is Stephanie Helms, and I'm the Executive Coordinator of the Washington Invasive Species Council. And before we dive into Invasive Species Awareness Week, I want to give a brief overview of who we are and what we do. The Washington Invasive Species Council was created by the state legislature in 2006 and was tasked with providing the policy level direction, planning, and coordination to prevent and stop invasive species of all types. We like to compare ourselves to a compass, providing that direction that all members can use related to their invasive species response and management, all while serving as a central hub for education and outreach. Next slide. And to accomplish our mission and goals, the Council brings together all state agencies that have a role in invasive species, as well as tribal nations, federal and local agencies, industry, and conservation partners. Every organization has a slightly different mission, but the Council unites us all by looking at that big picture, identifying shared resources and responsibilities, and filling the gaps that maybe an individual agency would not be able to fill on their own. The Council itself is staffed by 3 people, including myself as Executive Coordinator, Maria Martland, our Education Outreach Specialist, and Jessica LaBelle, our Invasive Species Program Specialist. And of course, a big shout out to the Recreation and Conservation Office for being the administrative host of the Council. Next slide. And with that, I want to personally thank all of you for being here today, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to Invasive Species Awareness Week, a very special week which Governor Bob Ferguson proclaimed in solidarity with the National Invasive Species Awareness Week. So all around the United States, there are events and webinars happening to raise awareness of invasive species and highlight simple actions that we can all take to stop and prevent invasive species of all types. Invasive species are really impactful and can harm nearly every aspect of our lives. But luckily, many of the invasive species that are considered the worst of the worst are not yet established here in Washington. So the good news is that we have this unique opportunity to raise awareness and focus on prevention, which is our best tool in the toolbox. Here in Washington, we take great pride in the work that is being done statewide to address invasive species and to steward our natural resources. So this week, we're highlighting one region of the state per day in our webinar series. Next slide. And today's region is Western Washington, where collective action to address the invasive European green crab has resulted in the removal of more than 1.5 million invasive crabs since the January 2022 Governor's Emergency Proclamation. So we're really honored to have 3 state agencies with us here today: the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Natural Resources, and Department of Ecology. They'll be sharing their agency's roles in the European green crab response that includes more than 40 co-managers, tribes, and other partners working together to solve this shared issue. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our wonderful speakers to introduce themselves and get started. Thank you all again for being here today.
Hi, everyone. Maria, I can't turn on my unmute or turn on my video without with screen control, so I gave it back to you, by the way. So welcome everyone to this webinar. As Stephanie Helms mentioned, there are over 40 co-managers, tribes, and partners working together to address European green crab in the state of Washington. This is really just showing a snapshot of that effort, putting the focus on 3 state agencies that are working together to address it. And so we really appreciate this opportunity to talk about this really important issue and spotlight how those three state agencies are working together and how we're preparing to continue this work together. Go ahead. My name is Justin Bush. I'm the Department of Fish and Wildlife's Aquatic Invasive Species Division Manager. I also am the incident commander for this emergency, and I'm consistently honored by leading the charge to address this really important issue, working together with a lot of great organizations toward the same ends. I'm joined today with several colleagues who will introduce themselves.
Hey everybody, I'm Raquel Crozier. I'm an aquatic invasive species management coordinator at the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm in the AIS division that Justin leads, and I oversee the European green crab unit at Fish and Wildlife.
Hello, all. I'm Alexa Brown. I work with the Department of Natural Resources as our AIS specialist, and I work on our European green crab program as the coordinator. It's great to be with you guys today.
And good morning, everyone. Jude Apple coming to you from the lands and waters of Padilla Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. And I'll be talking about the work that Department of Ecology is doing on the front of European green crab.
Okay, fantastic. Well, what we're going to cover today is an overview of European green crab and talking a little bit about the risk to the state of Washington. We'll talk a little bit about the range and the history, as well as how the state has been ordered to respond to this by Governor Jay Inslee to address an emerging issue in terms of increased populations and the spread to new areas, and that coordinated response structure that's being used effectively for over 2 years now to address this problem. We're going to talk about the foundations that we've laid, the progress we've made to date, before we then spotlight how each specific state agency is contributing to this overall effort. We were also directed by the state legislature to develop a long-term management plan for the next 6 years. We'll be talking about how that's really the foundation and the roadmap for where we're going from here. And then we'll talk about what's coming on the horizon. Each year has been better than the rest. We've been building in momentum toward where we are today, and we're really excited about the future. So with that, next slide. So you may see a few acronyms or hear them today. Oftentimes we say EGC, that stands for European green crab, which is a mouthful. European green crab is a globally damaging invasive species. In areas where the European green crab have been able to establish large populations and been present for a long period of time, they've had dramatic impacts on other species, particularly smaller shore crabs, clams, as well as small oysters. In the state of Washington, they're legally classified as prohibited level 1 species. This is the highest risk and the highest priority for management and prevention due to those potential impacts. And when we're thinking about European green crab, we're thinking about potential impacts to eelgrass beds, to estuarine marsh habitats, the threat to the harvest of wild shellfish and the shellfish aquaculture industry. Thinking about that industry, that's worth over $100 million annually. So there's a lot at risk here. And there are also a complex array of other ecological impacts and food web impacts. And all of this can be avoided by additional prevention as well as management where possible. Go ahead, Maria. So when we think about European green crab, this isn't just an issue for the state of Washington. Where are European green crab found? There you can see their native range, and they've been spreading with human assistance over many, many years now. And when we think about invasive species, often we say anything that moves can move invasive species. Oftentimes those are human activities. And we're really excited to talk about some of those activities. And I know the Invasive Species Council is highlighting several this week. What's worth noting here is that this is a global invasive species, and it's something that's not only a challenge for Washington, but it's a global issue. When we're thinking about how to manage this issue, we're learning from others, and we're also informing management elsewhere. On the Atlantic coast, which is where green crab first came in the United States, it's been an established invasive species for at least 200 years. Interesting to me, anyway, is that they were probably introduced through contaminated ballast rocks, which was a precursor to ballast water, which is used in commercial vessels today. And that's also something that the Department of Fish and Wildlife regulates to prevent the introduction and spread of aquatic invasive species, which is another hour-long webinar maybe for next year. With that, they've been spreading down the Atlantic coast, and they arrived to the Pacific coast in the late 1980s. From that time on, they've been spreading northward and have been in the state of California as well as Oregon for numerous years. They first arrived in the state of Washington over 20 years ago, but in a very limited distribution. They're currently expanding their range, and this map is a little out of date because they're just starting to be found in the state of Alaska. Go ahead. Here we're taking a little bit of a more nuanced look in the spread and the emergency. What you see on the right shows square boxes that are orange in color, and those square boxes are actually University of Washington Sea Grant Sentinel locations. And we started to become aware of this issue and the threat to the Salish Sea in particular, we worked with Washington Sea Grant to create a really great volunteer program called Crab Team. It's just celebrated 10 years of existing in this hard work by really dedicated volunteers. We developed this network to try to set up an early detection sentinel framework to find European green crab in order to, number one, understand the spread, and then two, to find very first locations of new occurrences so that we could take management action with the goal of containment or eradication at a site level if feasible. And it's worth noting that on the outer coast, European green crab were present up until the 2000s. Numbers were relatively low. We don't exactly know what changed, maybe ocean temperature or some climate issues, things like that. Oftentimes with invasive species, there's what's called a lag phase, where a species is present for a certain amount of time before it starts to grow exponentially. Whatever the reasons, we started to see an exponential growth in European green crab in the late 2010 area timeline. And one of the things that the Department of Fish and Wildlife did was create this monitoring program to help inform this first detection network. Very soon after, we then found in 2012 an infestation in Canada in Sooke Inlet. And in short order, you can see that we started finding these populations in the Salish Sea. At that same time period, the populations on Washington's outer coast also were increasing, which became very alarming. And these efforts kind of culminated in finding just an exponential increase in Washington's waters. And that led to Governor Jay Inslee declaring an emergency on January 19th of 2022. Here you can see a snippet of that wording, but it directed the State Department of Fish and Wildlife as the lead state agency for managing invasive species to take emergency measures to respond to this problem. And this is something that we've been doing ever since. Go ahead. So managing European green crab is extremely complex. Managing any invasive species is complex, but in the marine environment and the aquatic environment, it's even more complex. We're looking at over 40 different co-managers, tribes, and partners with jurisdiction as well as interest in addressing this shared problem, which is a challenge because each organization has its own mission, its own values, and reasons for taking on an issue. What's been very helpful is establishing one framework for managing this incident, this emergency, and developing a shared mission and objectives that essentially guide the activities of each organization in terms of their overall contribution. And invasive species don't respect jurisdictional boundaries. They easily move to new areas. And so it's really important for organizations to work together across those same boundaries, which is really a great shout out to the Washington Invasive Species Council, which is essentially why it exists. Go ahead. With the emergency, there's an obligation in the state of Washington to respond to an emergency using a globally accepted framework and system called the Incident Command System, which is organizing the response and assigning different roles and how to respond to developing those objectives to then address the incident at hand. This is something that's used effectively for oil spills, for natural disasters, for planned events. It's something that's used for every type of issue and hazard. And applying it to invasive species is relatively new, but in the state of Washington, we're really firm advocates. This is working really well, so much so that the benefits of it have actually been praised by our military department, which oversees emergency management, as this being one of the best examples of use working together across a broad area with many different co-managers, tribes, and partners, establishing one common operating picture and working together to meet those objectives. And we're going to hear a little bit more about what that actually looks like. Go ahead. And I'll pass it over to Raquel. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. So you heard Justin talk about all of the partners doing this work across Washington. It really takes many hands and a lot of coordination and collaboration to manage the risk posed by green crab in Washington state, given the large coastline we have, with over 3,500 miles of shoreline habitat to cover. So since January 2022, when the governor's emergency proclamation went into effect, the over 40 co-managers, tribes, and partners have removed 1.7 million European green crab from Washington's waters. The majority of the catches have been on the Washington coast, so 1.6 million were removed from primarily Willapa Bay and Grays Harbor, and over 90,000 have been removed from the Salish Sea branch up north, primarily out of Lummi Sea Ponds and just north of Bellingham and in Drayton Harbor. The number of partners you can probably imagine has increased every year since the emergency measures went into effect. And in 2024, during the field season, we saw a large increase in the number of crab caught, both due to the increasing number of partners and trap locations that came online, but also due to a mild winter we had in 2023, which resulted in a fairly large recruitment event of green crab. So this table shows you some of the numbers of crab caught each year since the beginning of the emergency. It's pretty incredible, the volume of crab removed by partners. Just this past season, we had over 1 million green crab removed across Washington state, over 230 locations trapped by all of the trapping partners, and 25,000 trap check days. We go to the next slide, please. And these two graphs show you kind of a comparison of the 2023 season versus the 2024 season, and where crabs were detected and removed versus where they were monitoring for them but weren't detected. So the blue dots are where we had monitoring occurring but no crabs detected, and the red dots are areas where we had crab caught and removed by partners. You can see in 2024, we had more sites hit by partners in the Puget Sound. And there's a few new areas where we caught crab in 2024 that we hadn't seen them before in 2023. So the southern end of Whidbey Island and a couple new sites on the North Olympic coast. With more partners removing more crab, coordination is more important than ever. And we have local partners coordinating through regional coordination groups, thinking about ways to be as strategic and efficient as possible. And you're going to hear next from Alexa with DNR, who's going to give you more of a sense of what that work looks like on the ground and some of DNR's work to protect our state aquatic lands from European green crab.
Thanks, Raquel. So what is DNR's role? As we talked about earlier, Governor Jay Inslee's emergency proclamation came through in January 19th of 2022. And his proclamation requested that DNR identify European green crab as a high priority and facilitate implementation of emergency measures on state-owned aquatic lands. So more of a supporting role to Fish and Wildlife and prioritizing those measures on our state-owned aquatic lands. So we were really well set up at DNR to move into and help with the European green crab issue. DNR's entire AIS program was built in the response to the invasion of Spartina and played an integral role in responding to and controlling Spartina throughout the state. Our program built a framework and network of connections and partnerships that enable DNR to respond to other emerging invasive species like European green crab. Go next slide. So what are we doing to address green crab? So our mission is to support ecological well-being of nearshore habitat and fisheries economy by trapping and monitoring green crab along the coast and in the Salish Sea Puget Sound by focusing efforts within DNR's natural area preserves, natural resource conservation areas, and aquatic reserves. Next slide. So why are our actions important? So our state-owned aquatic lands contain one or all of the following. We have eelgrass beds that are essential habitat for many organisms. They also contain shellfish beds in some areas. All of them have rare wetland or riparian ecology. And at some of our locations, we have anemone sensors. So anemone is just an acronym. It's for Acidification Nearshore Monitoring Network Sensors. And these collect pH, salinity, and water temperature data that can support our green crab data that we're collecting. These state-owned aquatic lands contain some of the best quality habitat within our aquatic lands in Washington state. And we're aiming to reduce impacts of green crab on these essential ecosystems as well as surrounding aquatic lands. Next slide. What have we accomplished? So DNR's program started in October of 2022, given we were going for funding before then, but that's what I was hired on, and has since grown from one dedicated staff member and no boats to 5 staff members and 2 boats. DNR created a work plan that outlined our goals, trapping sites, and protocols. And then we began trapping on the coast in February of 2023 and within the Puget Sound in May of 2023. Next slide. So meet our team. So I'm here, Alexa Brown. We have 4 scientific technicians, Kelsey Sapp, Emma Omer, and Tim Teets all work on the coast with me. And then Neville Magone is primarily working out of the Puget Sound Salish Sea area. And this last year, we had Tim Teets join Neville for the spring and summer months when he is most busy, so that he has additional help and can take out the boat for partners, as well as trapping our aquatic reserves. Next slide, please. How have we been implementing our work plan? Next slide. So in Grays Harbor, our regular sites are the North Bay Natural Area Preserve, the Grays Harbor National Wildlife Refuge, and the Elk River Natural Area Preserve and Anemone site. So that's one of the sites that has that sensor that records pH, temp, and salinity. So we perform monthly trappings at our North Bay Natural Area Preserve and our Elk River Natural Area Preserve. And then we perform quarterly trapping at the Grays Harbor National Wildlife Refuge. And this is in order to provide data for the refuge for them to make management decisions in the future, as they have this data to base their management actions on. And then we have been trapping with partners as well. This year we will be out at Johns River with Fish and Wildlife in the Grays Harbor Conservation District. And then we have done other partner trappings within Grays Harbor as well at the Quinault Marina and on Grass Island. Next slide, please. Within Willapa Bay, we trap at the Bone River Natural Area Preserve, the Niawacum River Natural Area Preserve, and the Palix River. And in 2025, we are looking at trapping some in South Willapa Bay to aid partners in ensuring that a stable population does not form down there. And with Washington Sea grants, excellent information on if a population was to establish, a large population was to establish down there, it would affect the entire bay. So we are prioritizing that and working with partners to address that. Next slide, please. Since the beginning of our program, we've caught nearly 70,000 European green crab. In our first year, we caught 16,552. And in our second year, we caught 52,601 green crab. With the addition of our crew members, Kelsey and Tim, as well as the addition of our airboat, we were able to increase those trap days in 2024 and increase our efficiency in the field, as well as increase the number of traps we were able to get out in the field. Next slide, please. Within the Salish Sea and North Puget Sound, we are trapping at our aquatic reserves at least once a year, and then focusing on one of our natural area preserves, natural resource conservation areas. And then other sites include Cypress Island Aquatic Reserve Crab Team Site, where we support Washington Sea's Grant's crab team site there. And the other locations you see on this map are places where we have trapped with partners or plan to trap with partners. And all of these locations are outlined in our work plan. Next slide, please. Every year, the Aquatic Reserves Program plans and conducts a Fidalgo Bay Blitz. And this last year was our third annual one. And this is planned and collaborated with the Northwest Straits Commission, Fish and Wildlife, Samish Indian Nation, and the Padilla Bay Natural Estuary Research Reserve. In 2024, we, in conjunction with our partners, put 251 traps out at Fidalgo Bay Aquatic Reserve, and no European green crab were detected during this effort. Next slide, please. In the South Puget Sound, we're focused on our aquatic reserves as well as our natural resource conservation areas. These are outlined in our work plan. And then other insights include Anderson Island Crab Team Site and locations we trap with partners. Next slide, please. Within the Puget Sound, we have only caught one European green crab in our efforts, which is good news. And then with our trappings that we've done by ourselves, we've also dedicated boat operation and over 1,036 staff hours to assisting and collaborating with partner agencies and programs. Next slide, please. Assistance with partner efforts. DNR has assisted with a number of efforts, including at Nick's Lagoon, Misery Point, Shipwreck Point, Protection Island, Discovery Bay, Hood Canal, Dayton Harbor, and Beef Creek, and partnering with a number of folks doing great work in the Puget Sound. Next slide, please. A small portion of our program is focused on education and outreach. We continue to host volunteers and provide training in the field. And then we provide staff and outreach materials at events. So we've had UW students out with us. We've had Grace Harbor National Wildlife volunteers out with us, as well as some other students from a local school. And when we're out in the field, we provided them with the training that they need in order to perform the work. And it's really exciting watching people get excited about European green crab and see them in person. Next slide, please. What is next? In fiscal year 2026, DNR is planning to hire 2 additional technicians to work on the coast. This will allow 2 teams of 2 year-round technicians to be joined by the coordinator. Having 2 teams that can simultaneously target our trapping sites in Willapa Bay and Grays Harbor will allow us to nearly double our trapping capacity from fiscal year 2024. So we'll be able to trap each of our sites weekly, not weekly, but monthly, and repeat trapping at those sites as we see spikes, and also provide assistance to partners when they are seeing increases in numbers as well. Next slide, please. So thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. There'll be a period at the end today for you to do that, but if you think of something later on, I would love to hear from you. And if you do want to volunteer with us, I'd love to hear from you as well. So next, we'll hear from Jude Apple.
Maria, can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. And thanks, Alexa, and kudos to all the great work that DNR is doing to address European green crab invasion. And it's a great lead into the work that we're doing. We're going to move up to the north part of the Puget Sound and the northwest corner of Washington State and talk about work we're doing at the Padilla Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve and the area waters as part of the Department of Ecology response to European green crab. We've got two groups at Ecology that are helping with this, both of which are based in the Shorelands and Environmental Assistance Program at Ecology and located at the Padilla Bay Reserve. We've got Roger, Angelica, and Nicole and myself as part of the Padilla Bay team, and then Leah and Ali is leading up the Northwest Straits Commission work here in this part of the state. Next slide, please. So I want to familiarize you with the National Estuarine Research Reserve. Here we are located sort of centrally in the Salish Sea at the confluence of the Strait of Georgia, Strait of Juan de Fuca, and the Puget Sound proper. And it's really a perfect place for the work that we do related to oceanographic and ecological processes, but we're also on the front line of the invasion as European green crab are migrating in from the ocean waters into the inland marine waters. We are part of the National Estuarine Research Reserve System. Padilla Bay is the only reserve in Washington State and one of 30 other research reserves. This whole system was established in 1972 as part of the Coastal Zone Management Act and the Clean Water Act. And then located in the upper right-hand part of your slide, you see a picture of the Padilla Bay campus and then our extensive Padilla Bay proper in the San Juan Islands looking northward. Next slide, please. Also part of Department of Ecology is the Northwest Straits Commission. Northwest Straits coordinates funding and support for 7 counties and their marine resources committees shown here on this map. The Commission also leads regional projects that connect the work of the MRCs to other regional priorities, such as the European green crab trapping and removal that I'll be talking about today. Next slide, please. So the work Ecology is that we are doing in the North Puget Sound focuses on the 3 areas pictured here in this map. We have Padilla Bay, Samish Bay, and Drayton Harbor. The Padilla Bay research team really focuses on spatially intensive sampling within the reserve boundary and adjacent waters, and our priority is to protect the habitats and remove green crab from the National Estuarine Research Reserve. Northwest Straits conducts really similar spatially intensive trapping in Samish Bay and Drayton Harbor to the north of Padilla Bay proper. Next slide. So Padilla Bay, we began our routine monitoring for European green crab over 20 years ago. And there were several sites within the reserve that we trapped all the way up until 2015. 2016, the first inland marine waters in inland Washington marine waters European green crab was found during the summer. One other inland water crab was found in the San Juan Islands around the same time. European green crab, fun fact, the person that found that first green crab in Padilla Bay is pictured here, Glenn Alexander. He was an educator at the time, turning over rocks to look for critters for an education program and found a European green crab. Luckily, due to all the work that we've been doing in the state to let people know what they looked like, he recognized it immediately and thus began our intensive trapping. And Glenn still does work with us, continuing this legacy of trapping for Padilla Bay. And this is a picture of him out here helping with our recent trapping. The Northwest Straits, they began their trapping in Drayton Harbor and Samish Bay in about 2020 and have been continuing that to the present day. Collectively, Department of Ecology has set almost 35,000 traps and captured over 2,000 European green crab in the waters of Padilla, Samish Bay, and Drayton Harbor. Next slide, please. So in addition to this ongoing trapping, we've started conducting important research to provide additional information that helps manage our ongoing response to green crab in Washington State. This emerging research efforts includes identifying the temperature effects of on larval and larval dispersal and larval behavior, predicting dispersal, and also looking at growth patterns. So much of the response of our state has focused on trapping and removal, but we also know a major way that European green crab are dispersed throughout Puget Sound is through larval dispersal. And so better understanding their behavior, how they get where they do, and informing models to help us predict those expansions is really important as part of the work we're doing in Washington State. Next slide, please. So we're going to continue this work related to larval research, ideally funded by additional state funding that we should be receiving in the next biennium. The work we're doing and will continue to work is raising European green crab larvae, both to identify them so we can find them in plankton samples, as well as create identification libraries to distribute across the Puget Sound for people who are interested in figuring out if they have European green crab larvae. We've been hosting workshops to help train people in larval identification and also convening people just to talk about what are the emergent issues and concerns and opportunities in research related to green crab here in Washington State. We are also providing a lot of insight and support for larval collection methods that we're doing here so other people can use that approach. And then at the end of all this work we're doing, we're really hoping to be able to inform some of the models that are able to predict dispersal of larvae, and in those models incorporate different behavioral elements such as how fast do they grow, what are their rates under different temperatures, and that can help us predict where these invasions and new populations may occur. Next slide, please. So looking ahead and what Department of Ecology is going to continue to do, we will keep trapping in the North Puget Sound waters. As I said before, we're kind of a front line of defense as European green crab come in from north of us or in through marine waters. Some of the first occurrences are going to be here and where we're trapping. We're also going to continue to maintain these really strong collaborations and partnerships with shellfish growers, the Samish, Upper Skagit, Swinomish tribes, DNR, DFW, and a number of other organizations and partners that help us complete this work. And then moving forward, as well as trapping, we're going to expand our research efforts to really focus on understanding larval behavior and how that larval behavior can inform and improve our ability to predict where new populations may arise as a result of larval dispersal. And I'll pass it on to Brian, I believe is coming next. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Jude. I think I'm going to pick it up from here and talk a little bit about work moving forward. So one last accomplishment from 2024 is that the co-managers, tribes, and partners worked to develop a 6-year European green crab long-term management plan for Washington State. And the plan outlines high-level objectives along with specific strategies and actions for each management area and all of the partners doing work at the local level. It also provides trapping, monitoring, and safety protocols that the partners can use, along with consistent data collection methods. So we're all collecting similar data that can be compared across the state. And the plan was a really helpful opportunity for us to also look across what we're doing and identify gaps in resource needs, and think about what state funding, what federal funding is needed to help make sure that this important work continues. And as we've got new detections and new partners coming online, we've got the resources they need to keep the pressure on green crabs. So next slide, I'm going to share with you a couple of important state and federal budget priorities that we included in the European Green Crab Management Plan. We heard about a couple of these from Alexa and Jude, but one of the big ones is maintaining funding from the state for the pass-through grants to partners doing this work across the landscape. Those funds were included in the governor's budget, which is really exciting. We hope they continue into the next biennium so we can continue to have all of the partners doing that important work. We also have a request from DNR to help support protection of state-owned aquatic lands and the work that Alexa and her incredible team is doing, along with a request from Ecology to support that research into larval dispersal and help better inform kind of management on the ground by many partners. That research is being done, again, by Jude's team there at the Padilla Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. At the federal level, we are really excited to announce that thanks to a lot of work from many partners, we saw a line item in NOAA's budget in the last federal budget that was released for management, mitigation, and intervention of European green crab. And so the Department of Fish and Wildlife is working closely with NOAA right now to develop a new grant program to distribute up to $2.5 million in federal funds to partners who are doing trapping, early detection, monitoring, capacity building, and training to increase our work on green crab in Washington state. So if you're interested in learning more about that new grant program, please let us know. We're hoping to distribute these funds in the spring, early summer. So hopefully folks that are doing work this field season will have it to help support their efforts. Next slide. So there, as you've heard, there are many co-managers, tribes, and partners involved in this important work. We are just a few of them. But it was really an honor to come and talk to you all today and share a bit about our work. I wanted to flag some resources here. We can't do what we do without help from the public, and there's a variety of ways for the public to get involved in European green crab management. They can report green crab they see through the DFW reporting app, which is included right down on the bottom through that QR code. You can also get involved through Sea Grant's Crab Team, which you heard Alexa and Jude mention. It's a great way to get involved in early detection of green crab. Also, folks who are in the North Sound could get involved through the Salish Sea Stewards, which is run through the Padilla Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve and Skagit County MRC, which kind of pairs volunteers with different marine monitoring, restoration, and outreach work. It's a local citizen science group and is also a really cool way to get hooked up with green crab monitoring teams. So those are some of the ways you can get involved, and really excited to hear if there are questions from you all for any of our panelists.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all the speakers today, not only for presenting, but for all the work that you do. It's really incredible. And as well, as the speakers have mentioned, the immense work that the co-managers, tribes, and partners do. It's really inspirational. So with that, please put any questions you have for any of the speakers into the Q&A. There are 2 so far. Oh, no, there's 3. Great. I'm going to leave the screen up so that people can scan the QR codes. Please do so as we go through the Q&A. The first question is eradication the final goal or just controlling the population?
I can jump in first and others can follow. Eradication would be defined as fully removing a population from the site. And I think for me, it comes down to the spatial question of what is the site that we're talking about? Is the geographic scope of eradication the entire state? If so, then no, we will not be eradicating European green crab from the entire state. They're too well established in certain areas. However, at a smaller geographic scale, more of a fine scale, if 1 or 2 European green crab are just getting established in a new bay, if we detect that population, there is the ability to fully remove, meaning eradicate them from that specific geographic site. So it's all about a question of scale. It's a global invasive species. It's present on the West Coast, so eradication will be fully challenging, but through like management actions at that smaller scale, we can eradicate that site, if that makes sense. Would defer to my colleagues.
Anything else to add? Nope. Oh, go ahead, Alexa.
Oh, I would just add too, we're aiming at controlling the populations in our aquatic areas, noting that there are larvae coming up and down the coast, so that eradication is a really hard bar to set, especially on the coast, given that we constantly have inputs coming into these systems.
Can I add one more? This is Jude Apple up at Padilla Bay. One more thing to think about, even though the presence of green crab in the Salish Sea may be inevitable, um, the work that Alexa and Brian just talked about, if we get these early populations, such as in Northern Sound, and cut them off, we can prolong those larger invasions for many years, and that gives us time to better understand how we can adapt and respond to invasions. We can conduct research to better predict where they're going to be, what their survivorship is. So, um, you know, let's keep it is a glass half full of green crab. It's a glass half empty or full, depending on what you think about with green crab. But this work is really important to help stay off that invasion.
And I think it's just one final comment on that. There is this idea of functional eradication, where if there's an established population that you cannot fully remove, meaning eradicate it, you can suppress the population below a threshold where it has the ability to reproduce and have meaningful impacts to the environment or economy and spread easily. And so suppression to the point of functional eradication is also one of our objectives where possible.
All right, thank you all. Next question, what do you do with the crabs after you catch them?
Yeah, there's a lot of partners that are doing some really cool, innovative stuff, taking some of the crab into their gardens, like the Shoalwater Bay Indian tribes using them for fertilizer in the garden there, which is really incredible. We are helping collect them from partners on the coast to bring them to a facility where they're turned into fertilizer. So we're trying to make use of the large quantities of green crab removed wherever we can and put them to good use.
And thanks, Raquel. Great job. And I think part of what we're really excited about is trying to find beneficial uses as well. We've got a few different co-managers and partners that are composting them. So using them to actually make compost that could then be sold and used in gardens and in other uses. We also know that at least one conservation district in the state is taking that crab biomass and putting it in the hole while they're planting trees in an upland setting. So we're really excited about that sort of use and hope we see more of it.
Yeah, as Raquel mentioned, a lot of these crabs, end up being turned into fertilizer, and that's where our crabs are going as well. Every crab that DNR catches, they all go to a local facility that turns them into fertilizer.
Thank you. All right, next question. If someone finds a green crab, who do they notify and what do they do with it?
Yeah, we'd love to know if you think you see a green crab. I think the best thing to do is snap a picture, send it to us through that reporting form that you can get through the QR code here. We don't ask people to kill it or remove it. There is a lot of misidentification of green crab. They can look quite similar to some of our native species. So leave it where you found it, but please take a picture, get the location, and send it to us through that reporting form so we can get out there and do a little bit more investigating.
I think just building on that, one thing that we didn't touch on is how to identify European green crab. And green crab is somewhat of a misnomer. Much like people, we all can look a little bit different. Green crab can have a wide variety of colors. They're not just green. Really, the key identification trait is on the carapace, so the hard shell. On either side of the eyes, there's 5 spines that are very jagged, kind of hooked spines. And those 5 spines are the best identifying trait because it's not just a matter of if anything is green, it's a green crab. So be careful with that.
All right, thank you. Next question, I believe, is for Jude. For the larval green crab project, are you planning on working with the Pacific Northwest Crab Research Group?
Yes, the PSNWRG is one of the partners that that are part of the work that we're doing. So we have a number of different projects, partners across the region that have participated in this preliminary work. And so yes, they're part of that network. And as we expand the initial work, we'll continue to work with them.
Great, thank you. I'm going to combine 2 questions because they're very similar. They all touch on the same. They both touch on the same thing. Can you speak to the edibility of the European green crab and any thoughts to having a similar movement as the Northeast on making a culinary market for the crabs to help with removal efforts?
I can jump in first, and then others can follow. But are they edible? Yes. They don't really have much meat, and they're not a great size, and so. For the state of Washington, we very much prefer Dungeness crab and another crab that actually are far more beneficial and tasty. There are recipes to eat European green crab, but my understanding is mostly they're boiled to make stock. And so I think it's really worth pointing out that it's not the same thing as the resources we have now that is at risk. And then secondarily, it looks at your management objective. If our goal is to stop the spread and prevent them from continuing to establish and having economic and environmental impacts, we simply can't eat our way out of it. And so it's a tool in the toolbox, but what we've learned from other states is that it's really not the best tool in the toolbox, is what I guess I would say. Raquel and Jude, anything to add?
Go ahead, Jude.
Yeah, well, on the lighter side, I was at an annual meeting last year for the reserve system, and auctioned off was a special batch of European green crab bourbon, which, if that's any indication, it was not drinkable, and they do not carry a good taste, no matter how I've had them performed, so prepared. So I think Justin's right. We're not going to eat ourselves out of this or drink ourselves out of this problem.
Thank you. All right. We have a last question that has 2 parts, and then we're going to move into the pesticide recertification code words. So the first part of the question asked about volunteering opportunities to help with the identification and raising of the European green crab larva. And do you know how long these larvae can survive in Washington waters typically?
I'm thinking about that before I respond. So there are a number of light trap efforts that are taking place across Puget Sound. And Nicole Burnett, who's the lead on this research related to European green crab here at Padilla Bay, um, would be the person that we could put you in touch with if you're interested in hosting or maintaining a light trap or doing some of that trapping. If you're closer in the area, participating in some of the counting and identification of plankton, we are always interested in, highly qualified or interested people who can look at a microscope for hours on end and enjoy that. Um, the In terms of the duration and time in the planktonic phase, it's highly variable, depends on temperature, and a lot of that research that we have right now is based on their behavior in the East Coast and other places. So I can't give you an exact enough number, but I can certainly put you in touch with Nicole or get back to you with more detailed information.
Great. Thank you, Jude. Okay. That is all the questions. So let me switch screens here. Okay, so if you are looking for a pesticide recertification credit from the Washington State Department of Agriculture, what I need you to do is put into the chat. Now this goes into the chat, not the Q&A. Put in the chat your first name and your last name, or however your name appears on the license. It has to match exactly the license number and then the code word for today's webinar. And I thought appropriate code word would be collaboration. So that needs to go into the chat. Again, it's 1 pesticide recertification credit from Washington State Department of Agriculture. And after that, you are all free to go. Thank you again for joining us, and a huge thank you to the speakers for sharing all of their work and sharing their time. I mean, it's a volunteer, so thank you. Thank you so much. Happy Invasive Species Awareness Week. We hope that you'll join us for our 2 remaining webinars, which both will take place at 10 a.m., one 10 a.m. tomorrow and one 10 a.m. on Friday. So have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, and we will see you soon.
Thanks so much,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good chatting with you all.
Thanks, Jude.